Hey guys, this is Night Elite, and I'm back here today with part 4 of my LTN and Vanilla series. And so, there's a few changes from last time. You know what, I've added this display. I made a separate post about that on Reddit. I'll link it in the description of this video. But pretty useful for seeing what's going on with all the trains. And a few noticeable differences. There are now fluid trains. There are now way more circuits on each lane than in part 3. I'll cover that in a bit. And there is this big ass thing over here, which is a logic analyzer I made to debug some problems I was having in this build. And I made a different video explaining that, which I have also linked in the comments of this one. So, the biggest changes though as far as functionality are that the depot now is capable of dispatching all kinds of trains correctly. Fluid trains, solids trains, and empty or full trains of both types. So let's turn it on and see what happens. See here, it has immediately dispatched a train that is going to get iron, and now a train going to get copper, and it should also dispatch one to go get water here shortly. Yep, there, see, it sends a fluid train to get water. Now it's going to iterate through again, and off it goes. Another copper train. Watch it for a minute. Another iron train, this time a full one, which is going to go to our iron unload site. So you can see the other thing is that the track is quite a lot more complicated than in part 3, which part 3 is over here on the right. I've added a lot more stations. We'll take a look at them here in a minute, but you can see that they are all real or somewhat real stations. So it's dispatching a full fluid train, etc. So let's go take a look at the stations. So here's a copper station, copper provider station, iron provider station. These are not final versions, obviously, and this is the way they're set up is just as a demonstration still. But basically, these are just capped to be able to store exactly one train's worth of copper in these chests. And whenever they have exactly a train's worth, they send a pulse requesting a train to come pick it up. There's another copper load station. So I've got 2 copper load stations, 2 iron load stations, 1 unload station for each, and then 1 load and 1 unload station for water on here. The water load station is very similar. If this storage tank is full, it'll request a pickup. The unload station for water I've just placed just to have to not instantly drain all the water away. I've placed 8 steam engines attached to 4 boilers on here with a whole bunch of beacons on a separate power grid to, you can see that here. This grid is fully separate from everything else, so these beacons just draw down all the power these steam engines can make and drink up all this water fairly quickly. And there it is. So that's the basic idea. The unload stations are similar. They've got they unload faster than any one station can load, and they're set up that whenever there is 2,000 or fewer of whatever resource they're unloading stored here, then they will request that a train come and bring more. So I've run this for quite a while, for well over probably 2 hours now continually, without it glitching. I did have a glitch earlier, which is why I put all of this stuff on here, and this trigger circuit here is set to look for that glitch, and it has not happened again, so we are still good to go. So let's talk about a few other things. You can see there, it's kind of neat. You can see the various circuits doing their thing as the train gets dispatched, so kind of cool to watch that. What's changed since the last version? Well, this was the one from part 3. Comparatively, we've got way more logic on every lane now. Like, way more. Like, what do we got? 22 combinators per lane in the new one, as opposed to this 4 combinators per lane in the old one. So what's the difference? The biggest difference is that, I'll just turn it back on so you can see. But the biggest difference, and you can see with this light here, is that the version I had in part 3 steps through each lane one at a time, and then checks the contents of the train in that lane, and then decides whether to dispatch it or not. So here it dispatched the train, and then you'll see it's that the light moves over to the next lane. That lane was empty, so it jumps again, and so on. I decided that wasn't fast enough, especially once the stacker gets really large. That could become a problem for speed of evaluation. So what the new version does is a little bit different, but it does add all of these extra combinators. But what it does now is it just always dispatches whatever the rightmost train in the stacker that's capable of supplying the resource that is currently being requested. Full trains are prioritized over empty trains. So let's say that you have a station that is requesting iron, and you have another station that is providing iron. So you'll have, on these memories here, we can see, like right now, we've got no stations requesting and 2 stations providing copper, 1 providing iron. At this point, there was 1 providing water, but then the train left, so that counter-decremented. Yeah, anyway, so if there's both a station requesting and providing the same resource, then it will dispatch a full train to go to the requester station first, and then next time it comes around to that resource, if there is not any full trains, then it will dispatch an empty train to go and get some more. There's also some logic in here that prevents all of the trains from filling up. So once there are a number of trains in the stacker equal to the number of stations requesting something, or providing something rather, so if, say there's 2 stations providing copper, which we've got here. See, there's 2 copper, but copper doesn't show up there because we've already got 2 copper trains in the stacker. So at most, it will only ever dispatch a number of trains to pick up a resource equal to the number of stations providing that resource. So, because if you had this scenario otherwise, eventually all of your empty trains would get full of copper, and then you'd have a bit of a stalemate. And similarly, it doesn't even check for dispatching full trains. It only looks at the trains that are both being requested by a station and also present in the yard. So if there's a station requesting iron, but there's no trains full of iron in the yard, the circuit doesn't even bother checking against iron. It'll skip right over it when it's looking through everything. So I think that's the main functions here. I've made some other minor updates. There was an issue that very short trains would break with some circuit I had here before, so I just changed it very slightly at each intersection. Other than that, I think that's about it as far as functional changes. It's still tileable, so we can still add lanes. I've just got to go find the Rev2 tileable depot and overlap 1 lane of it with the previous lane in the depot, and boom, we've added another one. The display immediately counts that it exists, reduces the percentages, etc. And what we'll see is that next time a train comes in, it's going to fill up that lane and it can be dispatched immediately as normal. So, the design of the various dispatch logic. Before I started on this segment, I decided, since I wasn't happy with what I'd had in part 3, that I would actually sit down and, do some design of how I wanted it to work. So the blue blocks, the stacker, the rail yard content bus, and all this is what my original design was. These red blocks, this timeout logic and duplicate output preventer, and maybe some other ones I forgot to add in here, are things I added in later as I realized I needed them. So I'm going to go over this and then show you what that looks like in game. So obviously the rail network generates full and empty request pulses and carries train metadata. We've got an output signal, which once a train leaves, it starts a new dispatch. Request memory logic, which stores all the requests coming in. An on-off switch, which does what it says. It clears all the memories in the network and stops any trains from being sent out when it's in reset. Then the request memory logic generates separate signals for empty train requests and full train requests. Those ones get the contents of the trains in the stacker so full trains are checked against trains, full train requests are checked against trains that are already there, and only the requests that match trains that can actually service those requests are forwarded on to the dictionary logic. And similarly, the yard contents are subtracted from the empty train requests so that only a number of empty trains equal the number of stations requesting can ever be filled, so that your whole or every one of your empty trains doesn't all get filled with the same resource. And then the dictionary logic is the thing that actually chooses what thing to request next. There's this new section, timeout logic, prevents it from getting stuck. Say, it requests a copper plate or a train be sent to get copper plates, but there are no empty trains to go pick copper plates up, so this timeout logic will cycle through and move the dictionary on to finding another item if it hasn't been actually dispatched to train within a certain amount of time. And that timeout is reset whenever a new train enters into the stacker to prevent glitchy situations where a train could potentially get dispatched with the wrong thing, or like an empty dispatch signal or something like that if it came in too late, like right at the tail end of the timeout or something like that, and then the stuff wouldn't have had time to propagate through all the combinators and so on. So this is a safety. There's a thing that determines is the train if the thing being requested a fluid or a solid. It then adds F for fluid requests, doesn't do anything for solids. And then there's the actual request generator that sends out requests for full trains first. And then another circuit that prevents duplicate output. So then the stacker lanes themselves have a whole bunch of logic attached to them. So let's see what that looks like in game. So let's just go over this as compared to the block diagram. So this block here, I'll use a blueprint here to select. This block here, that is the output signal, so that when a train leaves, this both pushes the metadata onto the rail network for that train to the next signal and so on, and it also sends out a pulse which clears a bunch of logic over here and moves it on to the next thing. So it creates the subtraction that subtracts things out of the memory when train leaves, and it also resets the dictionary to go find the next thing once the train is gone. This is our on-off switch right here. You can rotate this inserter, turn it off, rotate it again, turn it on. This logic here is the request memory logic. The combinator I'm hovering over right now is the one that actually stores the request memory. So you saw there a request for a full water train just showed up. This logic here splits out. This one pulls out requests for full trains. This one is requests for empty trains. And then this logic down here does the subtraction as compared to the yard contents and checking against yard contents for etc. Then this outputs the actual requests down. This whole block over here, this is the dictionary logic, all these combinators down here. These actually scroll through every item in the game. This part's largely the same as it was in part 3 with only a few changes, but this scrolls through everything in the game and settles on one when it hits the signal that's coming over here. So see, it found iron. It can then dispatch an iron train, so etc. This logic immediately to the right of it, all of this stuff, this is the timeout logic. It kind of grew as I was debugging this, but that's its current state and it seems to work correctly. So this counts up to I think it's 100 ticks per lane, and if nothing has left been dispatched in that time, then it will emit a pulse, which will have this go over and find another item to try and look for. Other than that, we've got everything over here is part of the lane logic. These power poles hold our rail yard contents bus on the green wire, so you can see that the blue signal in the corner there is at 9. That's the number of lanes. T is number of trains. F is number of fluid trains. E is number of empty fluid trains. And then the other values are resources in trains that are currently parked in the yard. So right now we've got 2 copper and 1 water. And on the red signal there's some negatives for some of those, and those are used by so negative F and negative T and negative blue, and those are used to subtract signals out from the individual lane logic, dispatch logic in each lane to make the logic work correctly. Then here, this circuit right here is our fluid solid determiner. So this combinator has 1 of each fluid. There's a circuit in here that checks if any of them are greater than 1 after the output from the dictionary. Then, oh hey, that means it must be a fluid, so it outputs F. Then there's another bit of logic here that figures out if we are wanting a full or empty train, and if we are requesting an empty fluid train, it treats empty fluid trains as a resource to request, so it also adds E to the list of signals that gets pushed back. This is the actual request generator, so this sends out, this block sends out exactly the letter G saying, hey, send a train. G is our dispatch signal. It sends out what the train should contain if it's requesting a full train, and then it also sends out F or E, which are count as things the train contains for purposes of logic that came from this fluid solid determiner. And then this circuit down here is the one that prevents duplicate trains, so it lets only a single train go and then deasserts the output signal for all the other ones, because otherwise I originally, before adding that in, had a problem where, you know, it would be requesting iron, there were 2 empty trains, it would immediately dispatch 2, but because the counter hadn't been decremented yet, it would sometimes result in a case where like only 1 station could actually provide iron, but it would be dispatching multiples, and it would also result in the second one leaving with no attached metadata, since the metadata output memory over here, this one, would be cleared by the first train to leave. So, and then everything over here is basically trying to match up against the requests that come from this versus the contents of the train. So this logic at the top is mostly focused on putting what's in the train out onto the rail yard contents bus on these poles, and the stuff on the bottom here is mainly working on taking in this go signal and determining, does that signal actually apply to me or not? So the contents of each train are passed along this on this combinator up here, passes them along to each lane in the train, so that the values, and we can check that here. So here's the first train in our lane right now. It only passes its own values, which is, hey, I'm 1 train, I'm a fluid train, I have water. But the next train down, well, this lane's empty, so it's the same. Oh, now it's full. So we now see that there's more information there. So anytime that that any of these signals get bigger, so like this one knows, oh, I'm not the rightmost copper train. So if a copper output request came in, this one would not be dispatched because there's copper is greater than 1 here. That's basically how the circuit works. It checks against all of the conditions that match the current request and says, hey, is there only 1 of each of these things? That means it must be me that goes, and otherwise it does not go. So that's essentially it. So I'd almost forgotten to talk about this, but how do we tell whether a train is a fluid train or a solids train? Well, you may have noticed that the fluid trains are only one wagon, solid trains are two. On a final version, if you used bigger trains, the fluid wagons would be one wagon shorter, and that's how they're differentiated. So this very last signal, or this signal here, not the very last one, but this one is the important one here, and it is set up to output F, which is our fluid train value, if it is green. And if it's red, because the train's longer, it doesn't output F. So that's how we tell whether it's a fluid train or a solid train. This other signal at the end here is controlled by the circuit network, and what this is for is to make sure we don't get any glitches, because we have this other fluid train determining signal in the middle. So if a fluid train was there, potentially another train could try and come into this lane somehow, since if for some reason, I don't know, I don't think it'll happen because the stations turn off, but I figured better safe than sorry. So this is here, and if the inner signal up here is red, then the signal's set to red, and that makes sure that these chain signals on the outside in front of each lane function correctly to route the trains into the right spot. That's it. If you have any questions, please ask in the video comments or on the Reddit thread. Thanks for watching.